Alright, looks good. Alright, if you want to get started. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kristen Lyons. I am owner of Binghamton Brewing Company and chair of the Farm Brewery Committee for the New York State Brewers Association. Here to talk about hops, which is awesome. And we have some great panelists today that are here to tell you all of their information, what they're looking to do, and talk about the state of hops in New York State. Before they get started, I'd like to pass it off to Mark James, who's works for the Farm Brewer.
Thanks, Kristen. It's great to be a sponsor again of the conference here with the New York State Brewers Association. I work for the New York Farm Bureau. We're organized at the county, state, and national level. We do a lot of different things in terms of advocacy, but our policies come from our membership. And so one of our priorities this year that we just talked to the legislature about here a couple weeks ago was to pass a law that allows you as breweries to sell your product at local farm markets, farm stands and farm markets, within 20 miles. Yeah, the wineries are able to do that right now. We want to see that, make sure that breweries, cideries, and distilleries are also able to do that as well. We get involved in some local issues. I know Derek Edinger's here from Brewery Ardennes. We work with Derek on some issues with zoning in the town of Geneva. So we get involved in some of those issues. At the state level, we obviously do a lot of different things. And then at the federal level, I know there's a lot of angst about tariffs right now. We just came out with a statement here a week ago opposing the tariffs that have been levied. And we specifically cited in our statement the impact on craft breweries. So that's something we're going to continue to advocate for at the national level to get these tariffs repealed, because we know they're damaging not only to farmers but to your industry as well. Somebody was asking me earlier today about joining. Well, I'm not a farm brewery. Doesn't matter. We have all sizes and types of breweries that belong to Farm Bureau, and so I'd encourage you to stop by our booth today and tomorrow. We are debuting our very first New York Farm Bureau beer. It's a cream ale, 100% New York ingredients. Everything was donated for this, all the way to the packaging on this. And what we're going to do with this, the reason we did this was to elevate the profile of our farmers that grow the ingredients for these beers, to get people into tasting rooms and to tap rooms, to support all of you, and also to help the food banks. So because everything was donated, 100% of the proceeds from the sale of this beer at 8 breweries in the Finger Lakes are going to the Food Link in Rochester and the Food Bank of Central New York. So we're really excited about this. Come by and try some of this cream ale, and I look forward to talking with you in the future. Thanks.
Hi everyone, thank you for being here today, and thank the Brewers Association for putting together such a wonderful conference. My name is John Condzella. I'm the president of Hop Growers of New York. I'm a 4th generation farmer from Eastern Long Island. And I'm going to kick this off today, the New York Hop Talk, about starting to talk a little bit about what we do at Hop Growers of New York, in case you're not familiar, some of the programming. So our mission is to be a structured resource for the research, education, and best practices strength building initiatives for the Hop Growers of New York. We're a 501c6 not-for-profit organization made up of farmers all across the state of New York. This is a list of our board of directors. So we have 3 main initiatives that we're going to be talking about today that we focus on as hop farmers with our organization. And the first is the Grower to Grower initiative, where, as things have evolved, we're really focusing on making sure that all the hop farmers in the state are focusing on what matters most in producing a quality hop. So that comes down to the best practices, how they're caring for that crop in the field, what variety they're selecting, how they're setting up their field, how they're looking at their nutrients, irrigation, pruning methodologies, harvest timing, pick windows, which have a big effect on how the hop expresses itself in the long run, as well as hop drying, conditioning. And some of the ways we do this, accomplish those things, are an ongoing program that we have is a New York State Core Variety Program, where we're continually looking at which hops across the state are performing best on different farms, and which hops are also performing best and going to be desirable in the brew house, but also hops that are sustainable to grow on the farming side of things, so that we can have a decent yield, have a hop that isn't super susceptible to disease and things like that. So that's an evolving thing. We have not, we have a list that we're working on, but we're not close to releasing anything on that yet. We attend national and international events, talk to hop farmers across the country, and always trying to stay up to date on the latest techniques, new trends, how we're all collectively adapting to climate change with weather extremes, drier years. So that's an important thing. We put on webinars for our membership. So we'll bring in industry experts to talk about a very specific topic that they're an expert on, to convey that information to our membership, which is valuable. We send out newsletters to our growers. We have a website where we catalog all this best practices information so that it's accessible to members. And one of the important things as well is we collect data from the various farms across the state to understand which varieties are working well in different areas, even across the state. Me on Eastern Long Island, my growing region is a lot different than someone growing up in the North Country or even on the Southern Tier. So we're also looking at the regional aspects of hop production and to figure out what makes sense to be able to meet the demand and have quality hops for everyone. So our second initiative, which we're going to hear about in a little bit, I'm not going to take too much time on, is the Cornell Cal's hop breeding program, it's an initiative that we're very excited about. The goal of that program is to breed disease-resistant hop varieties that are acclimatized to our New York growing environment, to ultimately support our vibrant New York State beer industry in the state here. So our organization advocated for the start of this program 4 years ago with the state legislature, and we're thrilled at what's happening in the program and how it's developing, and we're going to hear a lot more about that in a little bit. But we attend monthly meetings with the Cornell team to provide assistance to strategic directive, and just making sure that what we're doing is everyone's kind of in the same loop. One of the coolest aspects of that program, which harkens back to our history in New York State here, is we facilitated the collection of New York heritage varieties, which were varieties that were left over from the heyday 100 or so years ago, that were left growing in a hedgerow alongside a barn. A bunch of them were found along the Erie Canal. And we've submitted them to Dr. Smart's program as kind of the foundation for these new varieties that Larry is working on. So that's something that no other state really has, the way we have the history of hop production here in New York State. So that's kind of a pretty cool, what was old in the past is also still relevant today to a certain extent. So we also submit data to Larry about what's happening on our member farms with different varieties and how they're performing. We facilitate with communication, trying to, Cornell, they work with a lot of different crops and a lot of different things, so we try to help be the microphone into our farmers and as well as the brewing industry when we need to about what's happening with the program. And two of the more exciting things that are a little bit of a newer evolution this year are we're working on a grower pilot program. So some of the varieties that have been, the experimental varieties that have been identified as interesting, which we do have for sampling up at our booth, are going to be grown out on commercial farms across the state to get another level of data from commercial production to feed back into Larry's program to make sure that as we're getting towards these New York hops, that we're doing it in a very calculated and systematic way. The other aspect of that, and a couple of you in the room might have already been involved with this, is the brewer pilot program, which we're going to be getting those experimental varieties out to breweries to see how they perform in the brew house. We're requiring those breweries to provide data back to the program about their experience with it in the brewery. And then also, I believe is important, we're hoping the brewers will be able to collect consumer data. What are the people in the tasting room saying about it? And that will also be useful in the long term for the breeding program because we want to make sure that the hop is acclimatized in New York and works well for the farmers, but we also want to make sure that for the brewers it's something that's desirable. So I think having brewers involved, getting them involved kind of now as we move forward is a really important part of the program. And the other initiative that we focus on a lot that's more relevant to you folks is the Grower to Brewer initiative. And our goal with this is to engage New York brewers with opportunities to explore and learn about New York State grown hops, their value proposition, how New York hops can be leveraged at the brewery to consumers, a couple of ways that we're doing this right now. And these ways are, nothing is set in stone. We're a small organization, we can pivot, we can adapt. So we're really curious, any brewers, the Brewers Association, Brewers Guilds, any kind of feedback is great feedback for us. So if you have an idea or a comment or a question, we'd love to hear it. But what we're doing here today is the New York hop sensory opportunities, being able to, we're past the point where you thought Cascade is just Cascade, for example. New York Cascade is different than Pacific Northwest Cascade. And if you go to our booth this afternoon, we have 9 different samples of Cascade grown from different farms all across the state. And even those 9 different samples are pretty different in my opinion. So the idea is to really get people familiar with New York hops, what they could do for you, what kind of beers would work well with them in your brewery. We also have a New York State selection program where we're encouraging brewers we're trying to pair brewers up with farmers in their area to be able to, as we approach harvest, to be able to go to the farm, smell the hops, as they're hanging in the field, and really kind of get a sense for what there is to work with, what they can be doing with those hops. And our largest effort to date in this initiative is our New York State Wet Hop Festivals. This past year was the second year. We had over 50 breweries engaged in it. And it's something we're going to be continually tweaking as we go forward. But I feel like there's a lot of opportunity with these Wet Hop Festivals to differentiate ourselves and to stand out as a region. There's only 5 out of 50 states have a viable hop farming industry, and we're one of them. And I think that's an exciting thing that can be leveraged with these festivals, because in order to have a wet hop festival, I know they ship hops overnight, but in order to make, in my opinion, a really quality wet hop beer, it has to be picked and brewed on the same day, and that's what a lot of folks did this year. It can be challenging logistically, but it also can be done. And then we had a lot of anecdotal reports from brewers that participated this past year that the wet hop beers moved very fast in their tasting rooms. It's interesting because, in my opinion, the wet hop beers is one of the only true seasonal beers that you can brew, because there's such a limited window of when you're picking those hops, and they're tremendously fragile and short-lived at that time, so they need to be, cared for well. You can only brew them in a hop harvesting window, which is give or take a month. You have to be in the vicinity of a hop farm, which most of us in this room are, with hop farms all across the state. And I think, it's an exciting story that can be told, because for a consumer, being able to taste a beer that's made with the freshest hops, the first hops of that season, experiencing that limited release beer, it's a remarkable experience. And, in today's day and age where we might be trying to figure out how our breweries could differentiate from other breweries, this is something that your neighboring breweries might not be doing. There's over 500 breweries in the state. We had 50 involved last year. So this might be a way for you to differentiate yourself in participating in this event, to kind of stand out, have something exciting in that time frame in the early fall, to share with the consumers who visit your tap room. There's also a competition associated with it where we award a glass hop to the best wet hop beer in the state. And it is a difficult style to brew if you're not familiar with it. But we've had a lot of breweries, even this past year, brewers that were doing it for their first time, made some very good beers and had success with it. So we encourage you to think about participating in those. I think, in the years as we go down, in the next couple of years, if we're continuing to try to build the momentum behind this, and I think as a region, it's something that we can even stand out for as a region to drive beer tourism here from other areas. We had interest in our wet hop from out of state. People came and attended. So it is something that's gaining momentum, and it's something we're pretty excited about at Hop Grows in New York. And lastly, I just wanted to mention a couple things. Please come by our booth, check out, we have the Cascade samples, as I mentioned. Right out here at the end of the hallway, we have our Hop Knows It All competition, which is a blind sensory competition. The winner gets the Hop Knows It All trophy. And yeah, we appreciate you all being here. I'm going to pass it off to Dr. Smart for his talk.
We should all recognize that John is a national Hop Knows It All winner.
Prove it!
Are you competing here, John?
I don't know if that would be a conflict of interest, but I'm tempted.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for that introduction. My name is Larry Smart. I'm a professor in the horticulture section in the School of Integrated Plant Science. I'm based at Cornell Agritech in Geneva. And I'm going to just fill in some details to the overview that John provided of breeding program that we've initiated, an overall hop research program at Cornell Agritech. But it is truly a partnership with Hop Growers of New York. The work that I'm going to show you was done by my new PhD student, Nathan Lewis, my technician, Ben Jablonski, and we get a lot of help, part-time help from one of the pioneer hop growers here in New York, Rick Peterson. We work together with our plant pathologist, Frank Hay, and folks in our brewing and analytical lab, Chris Gerling, as well as our hop extension specialist, Frank Adeo. And the person I should have put on here as well is Lynn Sosnowski, who is our lead scientist. So we have a pretty well-rounded research team at Cornell working on hops. So again, as John mentioned, and Mark was at one of the initial meetings that we had at Agritech with Dan Palladino there as well, and John, I think, was there, expressing stakeholder need for Cornell to initiate a hop breeding program in New York. I'm sure most of you know, and you can see upstairs, that most of the hops grown in the U.S. have been privately bred. They're very tightly controlled. There are 2 public hop breeding programs run by the USDA, one in Prosser, Washington, one in Corvallis, Oregon. Those environments are very different than our environment. Their disease pressures are very different than they are in New York. And again, we want to promote this farm to table movement, culture that we have in New York, and encourage our brewers to use local ingredients. This hop breeding program parallels our malting barley breeding program run by Mark Sorrells, my colleague in plant breeding, that has been pretty successful. So we're very happy that the legislature agreed to this initiative and has continued to fund us, and again, I think that funding is going to continue into this year's budget. So we're fairly new at this. I'm new to the brewing industry, so I've got a steep learning curve. This is my first time at the Brewers Conference, but I really appreciate interacting with all the brewers, and I'm learning a lot about their assessment of our hops in the booth. Our overall breeding goals are for disease resistance, number 1. We do have heavy disease pressure in New York State. It was probably the main issue that forced hop growers in New York back in 1800 to move to the Pacific Northwest. But even now, we have a new emerging disease that has only come to the front in the last 4 or 5 years, called halo blight. It's not present in the Pacific Northwest yet. So it is a critical issue for us in New York, Michigan, and Ontario, where we are seeing significant damage and economic loss due to this fungal pathogen diaporthy. We have always had downy mildew and powdery mildew. We have some tools to control that, some fungicides. That's another thing about the new halo blight disease, is that as a new disease, the fungicide labels don't include that specifically. So if some of the fungicides happen to work on halo blight that you're also spraying for powdery mildew, that's great, but we need to get halo blight as a target for those fungicides onto the labels so growers can legally be applying these tools. And of course, we need our growers to be profitable, and that means yield needs to be competitive, and they need to be able to pick and get the quality of hops to you that you need. So how do you start a brand new breeding program when you don't have, a 100-year-old germplasm collection? It's a challenge. But as John mentioned, one initiative that we took, and actually this sort of started rolling on its own when Cornell put out an article saying that we were going to start our breeding program. People started calling me and emailing me saying, I've got that hop that my grandfather planted on the farm, and it's still there from 70 years ago. Would you like it? Very generous people. Sure, we'll take that. And we're up to now 23 collections from New York State of what we like to call heritage varieties. Again, they're not wild because they're not out there breeding. They're an isolated, lonely female with no males. We have not found any males so far in New York State. So there's no active breeding or feral hops out there. That's why we use the term heritage. We did some DNA fingerprinting of this together with folks in the USDA at Oregon State. And the interesting thing is that a lot of these, 10 of the 23, were identical clones of Canadian red vine. At least that's what we think so far. There may be some little differences between them, but most likely they are all a similar cultivar, a Canadian red vine cultivar that was grown, 60 or 70 years ago. 5 of them are an early cluster. And in fact, when we go back and look at notes, there was a hop research program at the New York State Ag Experiment Station in Geneva, where I'm at, in the late 1930s into the late 1940s. And Canadian red vine and early cluster were 2 of the varieties that they were studying back then in the 30s and 40s. So that all makes sense. Some things are unique though. We found 2 varieties that when you match them up to the USDA collection, they come out closest to Shinchuasi, which is a Japanese variety. We don't think that Shinchuasi got imported and ended up in a wild spot in the Catskill Mountains. But it could be a seedling of Sots. So it is related to Sots. And we also have 2 that are seedlings of Whitbread's Golding, a historic British hop variety. We do have a couple of male seedlings from one of our hop growers that are most likely progeny of Centennial, and again, 2 of them are not like anything that's in the USDA collection. So this past year in 2024 was really the first year that we got full yield. It takes a couple of years to get things established, and especially we were brand new at planting and growing hops. So I would say these are the first real representative yields of more than 30 varieties that we harvested from our hop yard. We're now up to more than 50 varieties there, and we are harvesting each one on the proper day for its picking window. And what you can see is that some of these heritage hops, so the EC here in front is early cluster. So some of those early cluster types are our top yielding varieties, competitive with Triple Pearl, Vista, Crystal, and Newport, and Nugget. So that's a good sign. The next step, as we're going to talk about, is do they have the brewing quality that we need? The green dots here represent varieties that we consider as core New York State varieties, as John talked about. Centennial, Cascade, Nugget among them. And then these ones with the stars are 5 that we have selected as having economically viable yields that we now need brewing quality tests done on. And that includes this one, Shands, which was in its first growing season. So very good yields even as a baby. So these are the picking windows, picking dates for these varieties. And again, that's an important consideration for the grower because you can't have everything ready on the same day. You have limited drying capacity, limited labor to pick those. So again, trying to identify some that are spread out across the picking window is an important consideration for growers. I'll just highlight here is one of the USDA varieties, 008, from John Henning's breeding program. Matured very early in the first week of August, even earlier than Centennial. And then this one on the other end, a heritage variety collected in Maryland called Monocacy, was still not ready in the first week of October. We didn't even pick it. It was gone by then. So this also then gives us a range of maturity dates that we can incorporate into our breeding program. All of these are public varieties, so I am able to breed with all of these. This is our main picking window, at least in Geneva, is from about the third week of August into the second week of September. I'll just highlight some things that, again, we're here to take the risk for the growers. This man to my left takes incredible risks, has planted a lot of experimental varieties, but at his own expense. That's what we at Cornell are here to do, is to take that risk using public funds from New York State, so that hopefully, Chris isn't losing money on things like this. A variety from the North Carolina State breeding program that this year just got hammered by powdery mildew. Even though we were spraying on a full commercial regime, you can see that those cones are in really bad shape. We did not harvest it. This is a variety that's being used by Sierra Nevada in Ashland, but they never screened it for powdery mildew sensitivity. They don't have powdery mildew in Ashland. These folks might have heard, oh, we got this great North Carolina State variety, let's plant an acre of it, and that would have been a pretty bad decision. And this Monocacy, again, was mature so late in the season that we couldn't even harvest it. Again, we're new to this. This was our first real harvest, running things through our wolf picker. That went pretty well overall. We had some issues with drying, so we were concerned about overall quality in terms of hop storage index. Fortunately, all of these fell below that 0.3 threshold for sufficient quality in terms of HSI, so we were pretty happy about that, and we will only do better in the future. And again, I'm not going to judge whether you want high alpha, low alpha, what you want. I'm just here to present the data to you and present those hops for your sensory analysis, and we will respond to your feedback on that. But a lot of these early cluster are relatively low acid varieties and also relatively low in total oils. So as an example, Vista, a public variety, Vista Crystal, Triple Pearl, all pretty high in total oils, but our early cluster varieties relatively low. So I'm going to leave that. We've got all of the analysis done by AAR, and we're happy to share that with you as you're picking out what you want to work with. So here are the 5, and we have samples of these upstairs in the hop growers booth. If you want to do some sensory analysis, 3 of them are heritage varieties that we collected in New York, and 2 of them are USDA varieties. Triple Pearl was released in 2013, and USDA 032, that was bred in 2000 in John Henning's program, has essentially been rejected in the Pacific Northwest. But Chris has been growing quite a bit of it, and we have a number of brewers, many in the room, who have tried it and are pretty enthusiastic about it. So here's a situation where we in New York can push the USDA, which has always been responding to the PNW. Here's a situation where they need to respond to New York growers, because we want this hop, we want to be able to name it, and we want to get it into the hands of New York brewers. We have started breeding. We now have some males. That has been a challenge. When the USDA says that it has publicly available hops in their repository, I've now learned that that means publicly available means that it's available to the USDA, which is a public entity. But it doesn't always mean that it's immediately available to me in New York. So that has been a challenge, but we are now, I say it takes some relationship building. And fortunately now I think I have those relationships with folks in Prosser and Corvallis. And we have some good disease-resistant high alpha males coming to our program. We have completed 33 crosses in 2021, and we had a very good year last year. And so this is how we do those crosses. We put a bag around the receptive female burrs, put some pollen in there, and then seal the bag up and wait for those seeds to mature. So we will be putting out about 2,500 seedlings into our seedling nursery yard this year. And then that's the next challenge, is how do you pick out the top 10 or 20 out of 2,500 seedlings? So just future plans, and then I'll get to your question. We do want to continue making new crosses with downy and powdery mildew resistant parents and figure out some ways to do early screening of those, so that if we can screen for downy and powdery mildew in a nursery at the seedling level, get rid of 2,000 plants out of those 2,500 and just put 500 out in the nursery, that saves us a lot of cost and expense. There is no known resistance to halo blight at this point, so that will be a big initiative we need to take on, is seeing if there is any genetic resistance to halo blight. And as John mentioned, we are seeking funding through the Specialty Crop Block program to set up a pilot program to fund the installation of some of these promising experimental lines on the farms of New York growers across the state, from Long Island to Buffalo. And that will give us enough hops that we can really do a higher level, higher scale of pilot brewing studies, not just at the 1 barrel level, but up to the 10 barrel level. I want to invite all of you, if you're a hop grower, come to our Hop Growers Twilight meeting on July 29th in the evening. That will be focused on our breeding program, crop management, pest and disease management, and any other issues at the growers level. But for the brewers, we want you to come when those plants are mature and the cones are, fully out there. So come on August 26th, that's a Tuesday at 10:30. If that date doesn't work for you, contact me. We'll find another date that works for you. Maybe on the weekend would be better. And because we want you out there in the hop yard, especially if you're thinking about a wet hop beer, that's the time to finalize that. And we'd be happy to facilitate whatever pilot beers you want to work with all these varieties. So I will wrap things up there. Again, I am sincerely thankful of our ongoing funding from New York State Ag and Markets and coordination with Hop Growers of New York. Send me an email, check out our website. We are new at this, so we need your feedback and your guidance. Be happy to take any questions. Yeah.
I'm sorry, you may have dropped a bombshell on me. USDA, we're all tax-paying citizens. You can't just get, I couldn't call up the USDA and go, hey, can I purchase a seedling of whatever? Whatever they're experimental, I can't do that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The question is, this is a federally funded public program. The mission is to serve U.S. businesses and U.S. farmers. Can't we just tap into all of those resources that we've been investing in for all these years? Theoretically, yes. Practically, no. So the first issue is that they will only release things out of state once it's gone through a 2 or 3 year process of making sure they're virus free.
That's reasonable.
That's reasonable, but it immediately delays everything. They can keep things within state, is the thing. So John's program is in Oregon. He can share all of his experimental varieties with Oregon hop growers, but we don't have access to that, at least for 3 years. And it's very expensive to do that, so he's only doing that with his very final elite selections. So I can't just call him Well, so the next question is about intellectual property. So actually, the USDA breeders hold intellectual property in their crosses. So those are not open source. The breeder actually has to go through paperwork to have that intellectual property released to the public. And so that's the process that they've gone through with Vista and Triumph and Cascade and Mount Hood and all of those. But if I call up John and say, oh, I heard you just did this great cross, and it probably has downy mildew resistance, can you send me 500 seeds of that? The answer is no. Wait for 15 years until I release it.
So what can New York hop growers do? I mean, like, I grow hops in my backyard. Can I make some crosses and send some seeds to Cornell?
I would be happy to do those evaluations for you. If you're willing to let Cornell commercialize them. So that's one step that we have not gotten to.
That's me giving up my intellectual property for whatever.
Yep, so that's gonna be a licensing arrangement. So anything that I breed at Cornell on Cornell property is owned by Cornell. And there will be a licensing process that I'm sure will be, it will be very.
Owned by all of us in New York State.
It will be very fit, it's actually private, but we're getting state funding, so it will be very favorable to the hop growers of New York, I'm sure. I don't do that licensing, I'm just a plant breeder. But let me use as an example, Ruby Frost and Snapdragon, which were bred in Geneva in cooperation with the apple growers of New York. That licensing was very favorable and was structured to build out production in New York first, with New York apple growers. So I've taken way too much time.
No, you're great. Thank you so much. Sorry. Yeah, if anybody has any questions afterwards, thank you very much.
All right. All right. So we heard a bit of the things that are going on with Hop Growers in New York from John, and what Hop Growers in New York are working on with the government funding as well as the best practices and the marketing of hops here in New York State. We heard about the breeding program with Larry, and now we're going to talk a little bit about marketing or the actual sales side of everything. And for anybody that don't know me, Chris Holden, Director of Sales and Marketing for the Hop Guild, and then also the Dumb Farmer at Crooked Creek Hops. So I gave a very similar presentation for the Hop Growers in New York a couple months back, so I tailored this more for the brewer side. And the big thing was, where does New York fit into the picture? We'll start off with the highlights from the 2024 growing season. 2023-2024 winter, as most of you know, we didn't have barely any snow. It was dry. There was a lot of worry that there was going to be drought, but with the mild spring, we were able to get out in the fields early. There was some acres that went in, and we did get ample rain to keep everything where they needed to be before irrigation went in. It was also the first year that Vista was harvested as a commercial crop on multiple farms instead of just a couple, or technically one. It also had, we had a great summer with ample rain across most regions, and it was also very hot. It was a little wet, and not high moisture, but it was just, some of the disease pressure was there, but it wasn't too bad. There was also expanded acreage on New York grown Triumph, as that has been very popular in the last couple of years. And the maturation of the current growers and the expansion of the current grower network, basically because of the hop growers in New York, has been awesome. A lot of the growers are starting to talk together, talk with each other, learning how to do things the proper way, and honing in their skills to get their yields up, basically. There was no reported acreage lost this last year, so no one took any acreage out. There was about 5.75 acres that was planted. Some of that was replants, so some stuff that came out and then just replanted with something new. And as of right now, or this last week, we know there's almost 6 acres that's going to be planted of new acreage this coming year here in New York. So some major developments in New York right now. We have more new hops come on the way. Thanks obviously to Larry and a lot of the work that he's doing. But with the release of Vista, it's really opened up the doors with the popularity of Vista and the trust of at least John Henning's program. And he has a lot of other things that are coming down the pipeline in the elite programs. And he has announced that he's going to retire, so we think that that is also going to push some things through to the final stages to be released here in the next couple of years. There's been a lot of popularity of New York hops across the entire country. There's been more sales outside the country, not just from even our own company, but with other merchants and growers in the state that sell themselves. We're seeing a much bigger uptick in out-of-state sales recently than just New York sales. Consolidation, a lot of growers are starting to realize that it doesn't make sense for them to be growing 20 different varieties on a couple acres. This doesn't equate to anything for them. It makes it harder, more difficult. And as we're trying to grow as an industry from a processing standpoint, our minimums are going up and up and up. We need to be able to have larger batches and more consistent batches, so that way when you guys come to us throughout the year, if you're only buying spot, we've got the crop for you. There's been a lot of collaborative efforts. New York State's situation is polar opposite of what's actually going on in the rest of the industry. A lot of you are probably hearing about that there's an oversupply of certain varieties, a major oversupply of some varieties across the country and across the world right now. Here in New York State, that's not the case. Over the last 3 years, it's been about the same amount of pounds produced year over year, and each year we continue to run out quicker. We're finding out that Cascade's still king. Cascade, from a grower standpoint, is still the most economical hop that we see here in New York State. Some of that is due to Vista can probably get a higher revenue, is what we're seeing, with a higher yield. But the issue is when it comes to harvesting, a lot of the harvesters here in the state, they're smaller, little Wolf 140s, including myself and John, and the Vista just doesn't go through the harvester as well as, say, a Cascade does. Premiumization. This is something that the private breeding programs have done a great job with, obviously with Citra and Mosaic and everything else. One cool thing with New York, and since we are small and the hops are becoming more and more rare, I guess you could say, because we're smaller growers, kind of starting to relate ourselves to like a New Zealand, right? New Zealand has their own Cascade, New Zealand has their own Chinook, New Zealand has their own Fuggle. We're kind of in the same boat. Our hops here in New York State, as you probably smelled either from our own booth or the Hop Growers in New York booth, they have some different things going on, different terroirs, if you want to say that, compared to some of the stuff that's grown in the Pacific Northwest. The other cool thing with New York is we're not all bunched together. There's pros and cons to that, obviously, but because we're spread out across the state, you're getting a lot of different flavor profiles from just the soil in general, the different microclimates, and the different amounts of rain even. There's years that sometimes there's growers 2 hours for me that they're flooded out all summer long and I'm dry as a bone, and next year it's vice versa. So there's a lot of different characteristics that come along with just those weather patterns. So we just touched on the New York versus domestic sales. From last year, there's been about a 2.5% uptick in domestic sales compared to just the New York sales. Technically, it was higher if you took contracts out of that. The spot sales rose a lot more domestically this last year. What offset that is with certain varieties like Cascade and Vista and Triumph technically, a lot of brewers are contracting those to the point that almost all of it was contracted out before the end of November. So that's what offsets some of that a little bit. But the spot sales have been upticking a lot more domestically, which is nice. I'm sure the government here is going to love to hear this stuff, but it also means that yes, there's less for you guys as New Yorkers. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. So, I get to travel all over the world, get to talk with different farmers. We have really close relationships with farmers all over the world. And there's a lot of issues large farms are having issues with right now. There's more labor, there's higher labor costs. They've done a lot of investing into their facilities, which probably needed to happen. They want to make sure that their farms are there for their kids and their grandchildren and everything else. But that has all come at a cost, and with the oversupply right now, this is making it very difficult for some of those growers. The profits on a small farm are measured very differently than what they are on a large farm. When I'm out working on my farm, I'm the one doing the work. I'm the one out running the tractor. I'm the one out doing the training and the stringing and everything else. So that money that we're making there, that most other people have to pay to them, we're getting that back in return. So our revenues might not have to be as high, so profits are usually in a way they're measured very differently. So we're small, we're unique, we're contemporary. One thing, I'm a millennial. I'm sure there's many millennials and Gen Zers in here. We probably all have someone for a certain job, whether it's a plumber or a welder or whatever else. I'm starting to see this in my own talks with all of you even. It's just like, that's the guy I talk to, or that's the farmer I work with. That's where I get my stuff. We're seeing this more and more and more and more. And that's where the uniqueness and the small farms and everything, that comes into play. It's because you guys are entrusting a certain someone to grow those hops for you. And I think this is going to continue to expand. So where does New York fit in? So a little history. Outside the 2021 and 2022 growing seasons, New York is still what was the largest growing region ever in the United States. Yakima beat us out, beat New York out historically in 2021, 2022. Again, we're small, we're nimble, we're unique, and we're primitive is what I'm saying. The small unique part equates to specialization that you as brewers can be proud of when you brew with it, especially if you really like that stuff. We're nimble, so we have a huge market advantage right now. We don't struggle with what some of these larger farms or other growing regions are dealing with right now. We're almost in a way we're in a growth period. We're primitive, and that's that growth period. We're going from a time that most of you knew all these farms. 10 years ago, if we sat here, we would have said there was 400 farms here in New York State. The majority of them are, they were hobbyists. We're going to continue to use this word because that's what it was. The ones of us that were hobbyists, probably including myself, we're the gung-ho ones. We're the ones that are here to stick around and stay. And there's a couple more of them that are here today. That's what's happened. They got into it thinking that it's going to be a fun hobby, and it turned into now a business. And that's pretty cool, I think. 2024, this last year, was loaded with data collection. There was a lot of things going on. There was a lot of twists and turns that we saw from a sales standpoint. We needed to figure out a new way of calculating things out with not having the amount of contracts that we felt comfortable with for even asking a grower to put some acreage in. It was very difficult to see that, and even the growers got to the point where they're like, well, we want to see a contract. That was really hard for us from a merchant standpoint, and even other merchants that we've talked to. It's like it's scary to ask someone to put some acreage in the ground right now. So we did a lot of data collection to figure out how can we do this smart so that we don't have an oversupply. So there's not it wouldn't be millions of pounds here, obviously, but hundreds of thousands of pounds of oversupply here in New York State. That would cripple everything. So this is some quick math that I put together, and except been asked, well, where are all the hops in New York State going? And it's quick math. It's 50,000 pounds sold over 568 breweries that purchased that at 88 pounds a piece. That's all it takes. 568 breweries to buy 2 cases of hops. And if you start equating that over 9,500 breweries, it adds up really quick. That's not how many there are here, but if all the breweries in New York State were buying, 88 pounds, we'd be at like 45,000 pounds. So something to think about there, that as our market reach is getting bigger, this is what's happening basically, is we're selling more because it's just small sales. and it adds up. So what makes sense long term from the grower standpoint? Right now we're seeing growers making real business decisions. These hobby farmers are actually sitting down and measuring profits, what's the revenue at, what they need for revenue, and what they should be getting per variety. And then also factoring in, if say if a variety isn't doing as well, can they offset that with something else that does a little bit better, and then kind of match it up, have your loss leader basically. The growers are also investing into the futures. I know just about everybody that we have here, I talk to everybody, and we're all looking at this, we're all thinking, we're all spending the right amount of money at the right time, so that way we can be successful over the next 3, 4, 5, and even 10 or more years. Many of us are already making plans for well down the road. You know, I know even John and myself especially, I mean, we talk about this all the time. We're like, what are we looking to do in 4 or 5 years? And we have plans for that. We're taking positive and a constructive approach to help each other out. Where in the past, we didn't have a lot of collaborative effort. Well, now we do. We're taking that, trying to raise, basically raise everybody's boats up. And we're investing in quality hops as well as a better livelihood. I know Paul last year talked about this a lot with you guys, and making sure that you guys are healthy and safe and everything else with what you're doing and the struggles you guys have. We're doing the same thing, or at least trying to. Because that's what matters, right? At the end of the day, if it sucks to do all this stuff, why would we continue to do it? So, a couple things that we're looking at, lower input costs on varieties. What varieties can we put in that have a lower input cost? Investing in the equipment and everything else that we need, and creating a culture for future generations. Most of us have kids, they're young kids, and that we're trying to make sure that there might be something there for them in the future. So, final quote from this, be curious, not judgmental. If you're not sure, ask some questions. And this is happening more and more, keep up that. It just makes sense, right? If you're not sure why something is going on, or why something smells like it does, or why it tastes like it does, start asking some questions and see what it is instead of just thinking that it's this over here, there's something wrong with that hop or that beer or whatever else. So that's all I got. If you guys want to do questions, we have time for questions? Yeah.